My mother said it across my brother's hospital bed to a ward sister, with him lying there. If one of them had to go under, why was it him? I had been dispensing in her pharmacy for 9 years, and I knew exactly which register she did not want anyone opening. The ward sister was called a Daisy. She had a biro on a lanyard, and she had been in that bay for about 90 seconds, changing a line, and my mother said it to her the way you say a thing to a stranger you have decided is on your side, in a low, confiding voice, with her hand on the cot side. She said, "You have children? Then you'll understand. I have 2. If one of them had to end up in here, and I'm sorry, but I have thought it, and I am going to say it. Why was it him? And a Daisy, who had been a nurse for 11 years, and who I would like to say something for, did not look at me." She finished the line. She wrote something on the chart, and then she said, "Mrs. Ballantyne, he can very likely hear you." And my mother said, "He can't, they told us." And a Daisy said, "They told you it's unlikely. It's not the same word," and clicked her biro and went out. I was standing at the end of the bed with a bag of my brother's clothes in my hand, and his trainers were in it, and one of the laces was hanging out of the top of the bag, and that is what I looked at for the next while. I did not say anything to my mother. Not that night, not the next day, not at any point in the 11 months that followed, and everybody who has heard this story assumes that is because I am the quiet one, or because I am a coward, and it is neither. It is that, at about 11 o'clock that night, standing in a corridor outside intensive care with a vending machine coffee, I had already started doing arithmetic, and the arithmetic was about a bound book in a locked cupboard in a dispensary 4 miles away. Because there was a question in that bay that nobody had asked yet, and the question was not, why him? The question was, where did a 26-year-old with no prescription and no dealer and no money get pharmaceutical-grade fentanyl patches in a town of 9,000 people? And I had a fairly good idea, and I had had a fairly good idea for about 2 years, and I had done nothing with it, and my brother was on a ventilator. A controlled drugs register is a bound book. Not a file, not a spreadsheet, not a system, a physical bound book with numbered pages. And the law requires that entries are made in chronological order, in ink, and that corrections are not erased or overwritten but struck through and initialed and dated in the margin. Every Schedule II drug that comes into a pharmacy goes in it, and every one that goes out goes in it, and there is a running balance, and once a month somebody senior counts what is physically in the cabinet and signs that it agrees. That is the whole system. It is 100 years old, it is deliberately analog, and the reason it is deliberately analog is that a bound book with a running balance cannot be quietly edited afterwards. You can lie in it. You cannot lie in it invisibly. I have been dispensing at Ballantyne's chemist since I was 23. My mother, Vivian Ballantyne, has owned it since 1996 and is the superintendent pharmacist, which is a legal role and not a family one, and it means that everything that happens in that dispensary is, in the end, on her registration. My Uncle Fraser owns a third of the business and has never once stood behind that counter and comes in twice a year to be a nuisance about the window display. I should say what my mother is, because a woman who says a thing like that over a bed is easy to make into a monster, and she is not one, and the not being one is the entire difficulty. Vivian Ballantyne opened that shop at 33 with a loan from her father and a unit that had been a butcher's, and for the first 2 years she did the dispensing and the ordering and the accounts and the cleaning. And there is a photograph of her asleep at the bench in 1997 that Fraser took and that she has never allowed anybody to frame. She has delivered prescriptions in her own car in snow. In 2009, she carried the Prosser family for 11 months when the father lost his job, not on a payment plan, just carried them and never mentioned it. And I only know because Mrs. Prosser told me at a funeral. She knows what every regular in that town takes and why, and she knows which of them are frightened of their diagnosis and have not told their families, and she has held that information for 30 years without leaking one word of it, which is a form of integrity most people never have to demonstrate. and she taught me. That is the part I cannot get round. Every good thing I do behind that counter is a thing she showed me, including the balance check, including the habit of counting twice and writing it down, including the sentence she used to say when I was 15 and helping out on Saturdays, which is that the book is the only witness that never gets tired. She said that to me. She said it about 400 times, and then in 2022 she picked a box up off a bench, and I first noticed the problem in the spring of 2022, and the way I noticed it is the least dramatic thing imaginable. I was doing the monthly balance check on a Thursday, and the fentanyl patches were 2 boxes light, and I recounted, and they were 2 boxes light, and I went to my mother and said we were out on the count, and she came through and counted them herself and said, "You've miscounted, Thea," and counted again in front of me, and got the right number, because she had a box in her hand that she had picked up off the bench on the way through. I watched her do it. I was 29 years old, and I stood in my mother's dispensary and watched her put a box back into a count to make a number work, and then I told myself for 2 years that she had found it on the bench, which she might have done, and which is a thing that does happen, and which is the sentence I used on myself about 400 times between 2022 and the night in that corridor. That is the part I have to say plainly. I did not fail to notice. I noticed in 2022, and I chose the version of it that let me keep coming to work. Peter Nunn locums for us 4 times a year. He qualified with my mother in 1988. He was best man at her wedding. He did his pre-reg in the same hospital, and for about 20 years he has covered the 2 weeks in July and the week at Christmas, and whatever else comes up when somebody is ill. He is charming in a completely unremarkable way. He brings a tin of shortbread. He remembers the names of the delivery driver's children. And in the September after that night in the corridor, when I finally sat down and did the thing properly instead of the thing I had been doing since 2022, which was worrying, I laid 4 years of the register out on my kitchen table alongside 4 years of wholesaler invoices, and I did it week by week, and it took 11 evenings, and it is the most boring work I have ever done in my life, and it is the entire case. What comes out of it is this. Across 4 years, the register runs light against invoiced quantity by about 11% on Schedule 2, which sounds small and is, in that dispensary, somewhere around 410 patches and about 900 tablets. The discrepancies are not evenly spread. 90% of them fall in a fortnight window, and the window is the fortnight following a period when Peter Nunn has covered, and there are 17 such windows in 4 years, and there is a discrepancy in 15 of them. And in the destruction book, which is the record of expired stock destroyed, and which requires an authorized witness, the same handwriting appears as witness on 41 entries in 3 years, and it is his, and the quantities destroyed in those entries are, on average, 4 times the quantity destroyed in entries witnessed by anybody else. That is the method in the end, and it is not clever. You do not steal from a running balance. You destroy stock that was never expired in front of a friend who signs that she saw you do it, and the balance stays perfect forever. And I sat at my own kitchen table at about 1 a.m. on the 11th evening and understood the thing that had been sitting underneath all of it, which is that the destruction entries require the signature of the superintendent pharmacist or her authorized deputy, and that on 31 of those 41 entries, the second signature is my mother's. My brother was 26. I want to put him in properly, because in a story like this, the person in the bed becomes a device, and Callum is not a device. He is a person who is currently in the next room arguing with a delivery app. He is 4 years younger than me. He is funnier than me by an enormous margin and always has been. He did 2 years of a music degree and left. He worked at the leisure center and then a warehouse and then nothing. And he broke his ankle in 3 places in 2021, falling off a wall he had no business being on. and he was prescribed for it correctly by a GP for about 9 weeks, and that is where it starts, the way it starts for a very large number of people. My mother's account of Callum, given at Family Things for 4 years, is that he is a boy who has never been able to be told, and it is delivered fondly, and it is not true. What is true is that Callum was the one she liked. That is not resentment, it is just the fact of the house. He is warm, and I am useful, and if you have both in a family, the warm one gets the love, and the useful one gets the responsibility, and everybody involved will tell you with total sincerity that this is not what is happening. I did my degree because she wanted a pharmacist. I came into the shop because she needed one. I have covered every Christmas since 2018, and in that bay in July she stood over the warm one and said out loud that she would rather have had the useful one in the bed. And the horrible thing, the thing I have never said to a single person, is that I was not surprised. And I have spent 4 years trying to work out whether that is because I always knew, or because at some level I agree with her. What I did not know, and did not find out until March, is where he was getting it from. I assumed, for 11 months, that it was the shop. I assumed my brother had taken it, or had been given it, or had found a way. And I want to be honest that when I did the 11 evenings at that kitchen table, part of what I was doing was building a case that would explain my brother to me. I was wrong about that as well. I did not tell one single member of my family. That is the part that people argue with me about most, and it is the part I would defend in front of anybody, because here is what happens if you take this to a family meeting. My mother is the superintendent pharmacist, and Fraser owns a third, and Peter Nunn has been in that family since 1988, and the first thing that happens is a conversation, and the second thing that happens is that the bound book for 2022 cannot be found. And the third thing is that I am a young woman with a grievance about her mother having said something at a bedside. A whistleblower inside a small business gets exactly one attempt, and the attempt is not a scene, it is a submission. So on the 4th of October, I photocopied 4 years of the register at a copy shop in the next town, 41 pounds, and I copied the destruction book, and I wrote a 9-page reconciliation with a schedule of every discrepancy by date against the invoices, and I put in a covering letter that stated my own position at the top, which is that I had been the responsible pharmacist on 11 of the shifts in question, and that I was reporting myself alongside everybody else, which is true, and which was not noble. It was the only way the document is credible. And I sent it to the General Pharmaceutical Council and to the Home Office Controlled Drugs Liaison Officer for the region by recorded delivery on the same day. And then I went to work on the Monday and stood behind that counter and said nothing to anybody for 3 weeks. 3 weeks is a very long time. I dispensed. I did the balance checks. I had lunch with my mother on the Wednesday, and she talked about the anniversary evening and the caterers, and I sat opposite her in a cafe and listened. And if you want to know what that is like, I can only tell you that it is like being underwater in a room where everybody else is dry. I nearly did not send it twice. The first time was the night I finished the reconciliation, when I sat at that table at 2 a.m. and understood that the 31-second signatures meant my mother was not a bystander in the document I was about to post, and I put the whole thing in a drawer and went to bed and did not look at it for 9 days. The second time was in the copy shop. I stood at a machine in a retail park in the next town with 4 years of a bound book in my hands and a man behind the counter waiting to be paid, and I got as far as feeding the letter into the envelope. And what stopped me was not loyalty, it was a completely stupid practical thought, which is that I did not know what would happen to Ivy. Ivy is dead now. She died the following February. But that October she was 87, and she came in every Tuesday for a prescription she did not need. And I stood in a copy shop and thought, if this shop shuts, where does Ivy go on a Tuesday? And then I thought the other thing, the one that got the envelope sealed, which is that 410 patches had left that dispensary over 4 years and gone somewhere, and that they had gone into people, and that I did not know any of their names, and that this was precisely why it had been so easy to do nothing for 2 years. Ivy had a face, and the 410 did not. That is the whole mechanism of how a person like me lets a thing run, and I would like anybody listening who is currently sitting on something at their own work to hear it, because it will be dressed up in your head as loyalty, and it is not. It is that you have met one of the people and not the others. The inspectors went in on the 22nd of October, unannounced, 2 of them, at 9:10 in the morning, and I want to be exact about the next bit, because it is the only moment in the entire 11 months that I would call satisfying, and it lasted about 4 seconds. My mother came through to the dispensary and said, in a completely normal voice, "Thea, there are 2 people from the council here." And then she looked at my face, and she stopped, and she knew. She did not know what I had sent. She knew that I was not surprised, and that was enough. And we stood 4 feet apart in a room the size of a garage, and neither of us said one word. And then she went back out to the front and said, "Of course, whatever you need." They came at me in the 9 days between, and it was Fraser, because it is always the one who owns a third and does none of the work. He came into the dispensary on the 24th, 2 days after the inspectors, and he did it at the hatch with 2 customers in the shop, which is the detail that tells you everything about Fraser Ballantyne. He said, "You've been talking to somebody." I said I could not discuss it. He said, "It's my business too, in case you've forgotten whose name is on a third of it." And I said that was exactly why I could not discuss it with him, and he said, "Don't get clever," which is a thing men in my family have been saying to me since I was 11. And then he leaned in over the hatch and said, "Your brother's in a bed, and you're playing at being the police." That was meant to be the killing blow, and it landed nowhere at all, and I have thought about why, and it is because Fraser has never once in his life been in the room where the thing actually happened, so his ammunition is always secondhand. I said, "Fraser, do you know what a destruction entry is?" He said, "Don't be smart." I said, "It's a real question. Do you know what one is? Because you've signed 4. And he had. In 2019, twice, and in 2021, twice, on days when he was in the shop being a nuisance about the window display, and somebody needed a second signature, and he was standing there, and he had signed a legal document 4 times in 6 years without ever asking what it was, and I had found all 4 in the 11 evenings, and I watched a 58-year-old man work out in real time that he was in a file. He went very quiet, and he went out through the front, and he did not come back for a fortnight, and the next thing he did was ring my mother, which is what he was always going to do, and which is how she knew before the anniversary exactly how much I had. So she had 9 days to prepare, and she used them, and what she prepared was not a defense. She never once, in 11 months, asked me a single question about the register. She prepared a story about her daughter, and she took it to a golf club. The 30th anniversary evening was in October, 9 days after the inspection, and it went ahead, because my mother is not a woman who cancels things. 30 years of Ballantyne's chemist, in the function room of the golf club, about 140 people, the mayor, 2 GPs, 3 generations of customers, the girl who does the deliveries and her mother, and a cake with the shop front on it, and I did not do anything. I want that clearly on the record, because everybody who has ever heard this expects the part where I stand up, and there is no such part. I sat at table 4 next to my aunt, and I ate a chicken dinner, and I did not say a word, because the file was 3 weeks in with 2 regulators, and the single stupidest thing I could have done at that point was to give my mother a scene she could use. She stood up at about 9 o'clock to do the speech, and she did 20 minutes of genuinely lovely material, the shop in 1996 with the Lino coming up, the flood in 2007, a story about a customer called Ivy who came in every Tuesday for 11 years for a prescription she did not need because she wanted to talk to somebody, which is true and which is the best thing about that shop and about my mother, and half that room was crying. And then she got to the end, and she said she wanted to say something difficult, because 30 years teaches you that a pharmacy is a family, and a family is not always easy. And she said, "Some of you know that we nearly lost my son in July," and 140 people made the noise. And then she said, "And I want to say, because there has been a lot of talk, that this family has done everything for that boy, and that when a child goes that way, it is not because nobody tried, it is because somebody in the house made it easy." And she did not say my name. She looked at table 4. And in that room at that moment, there were 3 GPs, 2 practice nurses, a retired chief pharmacist from the district hospital, and a woman from the health board, and every one of those people understood, instantly and precisely, that the superintendent pharmacist of a pharmacy that had been inspected 9 days earlier had just publicly attributed her son's overdose to a member of her own dispensary staff. Nobody said anything to her. That is not how those rooms work. What happened is that the retired chief pharmacist, a man called Alun Pryor, who taught my mother's pre-reg supervisor and who is 82, came over to table 4 during the coffee and put his hand on the back of my chair and said, "How long have you been carrying it?" And I said, 2 years. And he said, "And who have you told?" And I said, "The council and the CD liaison officer on the 4th. And Alan Pryor said, "Good girl." And then, because he is 82 and does not care, he said it again slightly too loudly and went back to his table. Thank you for listening to Channel Crystal Novel. My mother watched that entire conversation from the top table and could not hear one word of it, and I have thought since that this was the actual moment, and that it cost me nothing, and that it happened because a very old man decided to walk 11 feet across a golf club function room. The hearing was in the spring. Peter Nunn was suspended by an interim order in November, charged in February, and pleaded guilty in the summer to theft and to offenses under the Misuse of Drugs Act, and was sentenced to 3 years and 2 months, and was struck off in the autumn. The quantity in the charges is smaller than the quantity in my reconciliation, because they charged what they could prove to a criminal standard, and the rest sits in the regulator's findings instead. And I have made my peace with the difference. My mother was not struck off. She was removed as superintendent pharmacist, suspended from the register for 9 months, and returned with conditions that require her to practice under supervision and prohibit her from holding a superintendent role, and she is 63 and she will not hold one again. The business could not carry the suspension and the loss of the NHS contract during it, and the shop was sold in the July to a small independent group who kept every member of staff, including me, which I did not expect. And the name over the door is still Ballantyne's, because they did the sums on goodwill and decided a name in a town like this is worth more than a rebrand, and I stand under my own family's name every day at work, and I have stopped noticing. The council's case against Nunn found 4 other pharmacies. That is the number that matters, and it is the one nobody in my family has ever asked me about. He had locumed across 3 counties for 22 years, and the same destruction pattern is in 4 other registers. And 2 of those shops have since had their own hearings, and one of the superintendents there is a woman of 31 who had raised it internally in 2021 and been told she was mistaken. And she wrote to me through the council after the hearing, and we have never met, and we send each other a message about twice a year. The Regional Controlled Drugs Liaison Officer changed the local standard operating procedure so that a destruction witness cannot be a person who has ordered or received the stock being destroyed, which is 1 line, and which would have made all 22 years of it impossible, and which cost nothing, and which nobody had thought of because everybody assumed the second signature was the safeguard, when the second signature was the method. Fraser sued my mother personally over the value of his third and lost, and sued the council, which is not a thing you can do, and had to be told so twice. And the second thing, the quiet one, came out in the regulator's findings in the spring, in a paragraph on page 14, and it is a note of a telephone call. In November 2022, my mother telephoned Peter Nunn about the destruction entries. She had noticed, 8 months after she picked a box up off the bench in front of me to make a count work, she had gone back and looked properly, and she had found what I found, and she had rung him, and the note of what she said, which came from his own account under cautions, is that she told him it had to stop, and that she was not going to be able to sign for him anymore. She did not report it. She had a phone call in 2022, and then she signed 11 more destruction entries in 2023, and Callum's first patch came out of a batch destroyed on paper in the March of 2023. So when she stood over his bed in July and asked why it was him, she was, in the most complete sense available to a human being, the only person in that bay who already knew the answer. Callum woke up on the 9th of March. Not all at once, and not the way it happens on television, and he has an acquired brain injury, and he gets tired at about 2 in the afternoon, and he cannot taste anything, which he says is the worst of it, and which I think is him being kind about the rest. He gave a statement to the investigation in the June from a rehabilitation unit, and he told them where he got it, and it was not the shop, and it was never the shop. It was a man in a car park in Newport who had bought it off somebody who had bought it off Peter Nunn, and the chain was 4 people long, and my brother had never once in his life been in our dispensary out of hours. I gave evidence twice. Once to the council's investigating committee in a room in London with a jug of water for 4 hours, and once at the criminal trial, which was worse, because at the criminal trial Peter Nunn was 11 feet away in a suit I recognized from my own mother's 50th birthday. His barrister put to me that I had a long-standing grievance against Mrs. Ballantyne arising from a family dispute about my brother, and that I had assembled the reconciliation to injure her, and I said that the reconciliation was arithmetic and that he was welcome to check it. And he said that was not an answer to the question, and the judge said, mildly, that it was, in fact, an answer to the question. And then the barrister asked me why, if I had noticed a discrepancy in 2022, I had waited until after my brother's overdose to report it, which is the only question in the whole business that has ever actually frightened me, because it is the right question, and because there is no clever answer to it. I said because in 2022 I decided I had probably miscounted, and I decided that because the alternative was this room. He did not ask me anything else. He lives with me. That was not a decision either of us made. It just happened in the way those things do, and it is 19 months now, and he is on the sofa most evenings being funnier than me. A daisy I saw once more, by accident, in a supermarket in the second winter, and she did not remember me at all, which is correct, because she has been in 11,000 bays, and I have been in 1. I told her what she had said to my mother about him hearing, and that it had mattered, and she said, "Did he hear?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Right," and clicked her pen against her shopping list, the same click, and went off round the end of the aisle, and I stood in the frozen section for a minute afterwards. That is the whole of what I have to say about nurses. He sees our mother on Sundays. I do not, and there is no drama in it. We simply have not been in a room alone since October, and when there is a thing to attend, we both attend it, and we are civil, and Callum goes between us like a man walking a fence. He asked me once, in the first winter, whether I had heard what she said in the bay, and I said yes, and he said so did I, and then he said, "Don't tell her that, she'd never come again." And that is my brother, entire, and it is why she liked him best, and she was right too. So here is what I want to know from you, since you have been standing at the end of that bed with me the whole way. Did she go far enough, or was she still too merciful? Comment justice if the ending was perfect. Comment harder if you wanted an even colder revenge. Your comments decide how ruthless the next ending should be. Like and subscribe if you want to be here for the next me.